Welcome to the Soul of Medicine. Welcome, everybody, this week to the Soul of Medicine podcast. We have an amazing guest on. I'm so excited to introduce him. We go a little bit back through our yoga practice, and it's wonderful to see him bloom. So welcome, Devendra.
Well, thanks, Kay. Thanks, Rob, for inviting me.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. So let me introduce you. Join us as we explore the transformative power of breath work with Devendra Narayan. I hope I pronounced that correctly. PhD, founder of Cultivate Prana. And it's a simple yet potent practice that can help you break free from stress and anxiety and cultivate clarity and ease, as well as tap into your life energy. So Devendra will share his journey from scientist to breathwork scholar and guide us through the basics of his 3-step method for breathing fully and deeply, which I'm trying to do right now. So whether you're a seasoned yogi or just starting on your wellness journey, this episode is sure to inspire you to harness the power of your breath and to empower your life. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Yes, let's do that first, right? Take a deep breath in and out. All right.
Thank you. Sometimes we forget. I forget for sure, that's such a powerful reminder to get present. I mean, that's so accessible if we do remember to do that.
That's right. Yeah.
So can you share a bit about your background and how you got into breath work?
Yeah, so the origin story goes back about 10 years. So I immediately didn't get into breath work. The first practice that I got into is actually yoga. And I think we know each other from those days. And I got my starting at age 33, which is a very interesting number, by the way. But for me, it was, I was born and raised in India. I got my education in India. And I came here as a master's student. So I did my master's and my PhD. And, going back to the Indian subcontinent, I would say Asian culture in general, we give so much emphasis to education and success and hard work. And those are the sort of foundation, I would say, of Asian family. And for me, I check marked everything, right? I was checking the boxes to say, did I get a good education? Yes. Did I get married on time? Yes. Did I get a good job? Yes. And by the time I reached the age of 33, I struggled. I struggled with my emotions. I struggled with my physical health. I mean, I wish I could show you an image, my picture from those days, because I looked much older because of all the stress that I was carrying with me, because I was trying to fit in a society which, asked you to check these boxes. And I was, check marking all these, and I was moving forward. But I was burned out. By the time I was 33, my wife and I were talking about starting a family. We were struggling, and it was a very stressful time. I just got my first job, and women have played such an important role in my life. And when I say that, my wife was the first person who literally saw that something had changed in me. I was really stressed out. And she was the one who actually held my hand and guided me to this path. So she was the one who took me to my first yoga class. And I tell this story that I was the only guy other than my teacher, right? We are the only 2 men in a class full of women. But that's what it took for me to literally just break free. Everybody remembers their first yoga class, and I remember mine too, because something just literally cracked open in me. And I'm really grateful for my wife to show me that path. That was my beginning. And breathwork actually came in my life. So I practiced yoga for about 4 years, and I was reading a book by a breathworker and author, Max Strom. So he wrote a wonderful book called A Life Worth Breathing. And somehow that book really resonated with me. And as the saying goes, right, when you're ready, right, when you're truly ready, the teacher appears. Your guides will appear before you. And I was doing a quick search on the internet about Max, and saw that he was teaching a workshop at Columbus, Ohio within a couple of weeks. So I registered for it. I went there. And I never experienced, I was practicing yoga for 4 years, by the way. I'd had a whole lot of transformation. I had taken 200-hour yoga teacher training, but I'd never seen a transformation like that within a 2-hour workshop. And something like literally burst open out of my chest in that 2-hour workshop. The room was full of like 400, that's 200 people. Everybody had tears in their eyes, and I just did not know what hit me. How can breathing be so powerful that it could literally bring up old emotions, childhood trauma, everything in just a span of, within a few hours. So that was my introduction into breathwork. And once I had a taste of it, my scientific mind went, running for me to go into inquiry to understand what had happened. So that was back in 2017 where the new path opened for me, and I just haven't looked back. I've had a bunch of wonderful teachers. I met my spiritual guide through this practice, and I continue to learn and I continue to share whatever I learned with the greater, community in Indiana and abroad. So it's been going. That's how my starting point was, and that's where my practice began, and also my sharing began.
Well, I remember you. I had you over at our studio doing a workshop. I thought it was amazing, and we had a really good turnout. And so that was 2017. Is that correct?
That is exactly right. That's exactly when I came back from the workshop with Max. I just immersed myself, and when you start first, you sort of tend to imitate great teachers. And that's what I did. Actually, I took what Max had taught and I shared a little bit of that. And then eventually that as I learned and found my own authentic voice, I began to reshape that workshop and begin to really bring in some of my own understanding and my experiences as I was, continuing to evolve that workshop. And in fact, I still teach that very same workshop. It has matured quite a bit, but I just have taken that to our workshop. I must still share it with yoga teacher trainers in particular.
That's amazing. So I checked out your website. I'm like, dang, Devendra, like what has happened in this last 7 years? I think the last time I probably saw you, aside from the coffee shop, maybe a couple months ago, how you have blossomed into your website looks really full, and all these teachings that you're doing. It looks really beautiful. So what really inspired you to create? So it's cultivateprana.com, right? And can you say more about, besides that workshop, I see you doing online classes as well, and it looks amazing. So was that just an evolution from that time?
So one thing grew into other as I continued to learn. The Cultivate Prana was formed again out of the merger and understanding of the lineage of yoga and how breath is sort of an integral part of the 8-limb Ashtanga yoga system, right? I mean, we have a whole branch of yoga called pranayama. And in fact, before I got started with breathwork, that's all I thought. I thought breathwork is pranayama. That is it. I think there's nothing better than pranayama, and pranayama is the most superior practice of all of them, perhaps the most ancient one. And as I sort of began to explore, I realized that there's many more modern breathwork styles that may not be coming directly out of pranayama, but a style of particular breathing. And for me, it was sort of an eye-opening moment that, okay, the yoga community also needs to sort of branch out of pranayama. Although if you study pranayama thoroughly in itself and practice it, it's life transforming. You don't have to do anything else. I think you just immerse yourself in those foundational practices, and you can build a really good foundation for your life, right? For meaning how to cultivate your own breath. So Cultivate Prana came from the understanding that prana, right, is this invisible life force that bathes every single living being, on this planet and perhaps planetary life everywhere. So it's literally the blueprint which animates anything non-living to living. So that's coming from the Upanishads. If you look at the Upanishads learning, it talks about two entities. It talks about prana, which is sort of the life energy or the life force. And there's another entity called the Rai, R-A-Y-I, which forms the material aspects. So our body is comprised of the material aspect and the energy aspect. So Cultivate Prana literally took a deep dive now into the science and the spirituality and how breathing is such an integral part to not just our physical body, but also our mental and emotional being. And to take it a level up, I think there's a deep spiritual connection between the way we breathe and the way we connect with the divine. So the mission of Cultivate Prana is very simple. I think our objective is to enrich people's life by giving them a thorough education in breathing. So that involves the scientific aspect of breathing because I'm still a scientist, so I question everything. I try to find the scientific basis for everything. And I can only sort of explain maybe less than 50% of all this, much lesser than that. There's still things which are esoteric and spiritual, which even science cannot explain today. But Cultivate Prana takes a unique approach where we don't demean one versus the other. We don't say science is superior to spirituality or spirituality is superior to science, because dating back, I don't know how many thousands of years, remember, these were together. Science and spirituality were one field, they were one integral field, and sort of it divvied away. And now Cultivate Prana, in my philosophy and my approach is that I want to bring these back together. So that's the mission of Cultivate Prana.
Well, I love that. So, we were talking earlier before we started recording about soul of medicine, and that's what we think soul of medicine is, or, it's you can't separate the two. Do you know what I mean? And so sometimes, I would say the science or the medicine is this horizontal plane. It's all these tangible things that we're using with our intellect that give us the framework. And then the vertical, it allows that vertical connection to the divine and to our spirit and our higher power. But both have to exist. And that intersection between the two then is where the healing is sort of how I explain it. And sometimes we don't even have words for what that is. It's so experiential. You know it when you get there, kind of thing, which the breath work that you're talking about, it almost feels like, that openness that you explained is like that sensation or that, samadhi sort of experience, if you will, then we all are like, I don't even know how to use my words to do it. It's really hard, and people kind of need to experience that. But you creating this beautiful portal to the potential of being able to experience that. You keep seeking, you're hungry for it, right? And you want to provide opportunities for people to be able to experience that. It's so beautiful. Nice. Yeah.
And breath, I think, as you say, as we will sort of maybe unpack that today, it's an integral part. Look, when the breath stops, life stops. It's as simple as that, right? It's a cliche to say that, but that's a fact. And in our physiology as well, everything is connected, right? It's a closed loop system. I see breath as I'm an engineer, right? So I like to use this engineering analogies, and I see breath as a super regulator, right? A super regulator to, if you get anxious, your breathing changes. If you get happy, your breathing changes. If you get sad, your breathing changes. But wait a minute. If I change my breath, I can change the way I feel. So it's a closed loop system, and breath is sitting right in between our physiology, our physical state, and our mental and emotional state. And as I said earlier, it's a level higher, which we should also now begin to explore, is the spiritual aspect of it, which we don't talk often because we think about mind and body, and breath is sitting right in between. But mind, body, and spirit breath is that regulator right in between, which gives you total, absolute control over how you want to change the way you feel, you think, and literally your down to a cellular level. How do you nourish your body?
So could you explain for people who may be new to this concept of breath work, the difference between just like, hey, I'm breathing here and I'm meditating, and how that impacts the body and the mind, like you're saying?
So let's learn with simple examples. And I think we all experience that, or we all have experienced somebody else going through that state, which I give often an example of anybody having anxiety attack or a panic attack. Whether they may not realize it, but somebody as an observer being aware in a supportive role, if you watch somebody having an anxiety or panic attack, you immediately notice that they're breathing harder, they're breathing shallow, right? So it's that breath, right? Now, that person may not be aware, but once you find yourself in a situation where a thought or an incident have triggered a panic, an anxiety attack for you, your body tries to compensate for it by going into fight or flight mode. Because remember, as you and your audience also know, okay, that breathing is part of the autonomic nervous system, right? And the beautiful thing about autonomic nervous system is the auto in the autonomic nervous system is the autopilot. So just like an autonomous vehicle today's Tesla, right? You can get into a Tesla, you can program it and let it go, right? The system is intelligent enough that it can make the changes that it wants to get you to the destination. So fortunately for us and mammals and animals, breathing is part of the autonomic nervous system, meaning we just don't have to intervene at all. It can self-correct itself. It will do its thing and it will try to bring your anxiety down. But just as if you are in a Tesla and you do not like the way it's driving, or you do not like the detours that it's taking, so you can manually intervene. That's the conscious part of breathing, that I can actually manually intervene into my own breathing pattern, and I can change the depth of my breathing, the rate of my breathing. Everything that you can have conscious control over, you can actually take control over your breathing. So going back to our example of somebody having a panic attack, what do? Right? We intervene, and the very first thing we say is breathe, right? So breathing is really tightly controlled, as we were discussing, to our physiology, also to the mental and emotional state. So somebody going through an anxiety, a panic attack, we ask them to slow the breath down. It's a very effective way, right? Because you just triggered your sympathetic nervous system. And the easiest way to sort of calm the sympathetic nervous system down is to intervene with our breath by allowing that individual to slow the breath down, maybe bring the breath a little bit down below into the diaphragm instead of the more thoracic breath that is very active during the flight or fight response. Now, let me give you another example on the extreme end. So here we are asking somebody to slow the breath down, to change that state. On the other side, if you look at somebody getting through maybe an accident or an injury, the classic example I give is women giving birth to a child. Right? So in a labor room, what do we tell a woman? Like we say breathe, but those breaths are what? Those are much faster and deeper breaths. So those are... So why? What's happening? Because here you are asking somebody to go into that fight or flight mode because of the situation, because these kind of the faster breathing allows you to control pain, right? So it's such a phenomenal tool, and we all have used it, whether consciously or unconsciously, or have guided somebody else to a situation like that. But this is where breath really combines our physiology, our physical state, also to the way that we feel the emotions and just the mental state as we are experiencing through any kind of situation.
So I have a story to tell you about that. So it was a birthing story. So I was in labor with my son, and I had been practicing yoga by that time, almost maybe 10 years or so. And I knew about pranayama and breathing. But when you're in labor and you're in freaking pain, it was just like panic mode, right? I was like, it was horrible. And at that time I was, scheduled for a C-section. It was busy and it was just a hot mess. And I was panicking, and the pain was just unbelievable. Anesthesiologist was just busy. I didn't even know when he was going to come. And then I remembered one of my yoga teachers said, I mean, she kind of came to me like in my head and she was like, why did you practice yoga? Why are you not breathing? And all of a sudden I went to Ujjayi breathing. And I remember that from practice, and it shifted everything. And I was like, holy crap, I could completely control the pain that's coming with the contractions. And I was in such bliss at that point. I gave myself anesthesia literally at that point. And it was, I could probably have gone for another 3-4 hours just like that. But I had to like focus and really turn inward. And I knew what that breath was. So it was just locating where that was in my body and my memory and to access it. So this leads me to that question of like, when somebody's in the middle of panic and you're like, breathe, it's hard to access that hijacked mind, right? And so the importance of, I believe what you're saying is this practice of having that already in your tissues or in your memory or in your recall or in your embodied to know how to do that, because it's a little too late sometimes if you are in the middle of a panic attack, to access this kind of, or to be conscious and present enough to tell yourself breathe because somebody might not be there to tell you to breathe. So
that's a great point, Kay, because this is in our DNA. This is programmed in our DNA. So even if there's nobody there, eventually you get to it. Now, what the practice of breathwork allows you to do is to get there quicker. To get there quicker and get there with the right tools that and this is how I need to calm down. This is what I need to do. And you arrive at that moment much quicker. But to your point, this is really in our DNA and it comes to you, one way or the other.
Right. It's the first thing we do as babies, and we really don't access it like we should. Right. And so it's interesting too, that if we're not breathing correctly, the development, of the diaphragm in a weird way, also because that's just a muscle, right? That hypertrophies in a weird way. And we can't really access, our full breath or even getting that back breath. It's strange how we just are just breathing. I would also take my patients and I'm like, can you breathe? They're like, I am breathing. I'm like, my stethoscope is not moving. I know you're breathing because you're talking to me, but you're not breathing, So could you walk us through, what you would teach, how you would maybe introduce this kind of breath work to somebody who's not used to breathing?
Yeah, I think we can unpack that quite a bit. So maybe first what I would do is just give you and your audience a brief intro to what breathwork actually is. We have had pranayama for thousands of years. I know in the Chinese and Japanese traditions, there were practices, Tai Chi, Qigong, traditional Chinese medicine used breathing. Let's not forget the natives and the indigenous have their own breathing patterns and breath ceremonies that they used to do as part of their culture. So in essence, what breathwork encapsulates is all of it. So it's a term that is now an umbrella term that has been used for a lot of different practices. Although in order to use breathwork techniques, that really transitions us from the unconscious breathing to the conscious breathing. So everything done consciously to either change the pace at which you're breathing, change the depth at which you're breathing, how you're breathing, everything is now coming under the umbrella of breathwork. Now, largely spoken, the modern breathwork styles are based out of Tummo style breathing. So this is a rhythmic, continuous breathing. So what that means is, like in pranayama, we have practices where you consciously pause your breath, right? So you talk about kumbhaka, which is suspending the breath, right? And the modern breathwork styles, which started by, I'd say I'll give two individuals the credit for that, Stanislav Grof and Leonard Orr. And they both sort of arrived at the modern breathwork styles, which is this conscious connected breathing, which simply is you breathe in and you breathe out. Then you breathe in, and then you breathe out. And what you're doing with this style of breathing is the overall volume of the breath. So if we talk about the tidal volume, which is how much are you filling your lungs in each breath, which is roughly about, let's say, half a liter on average that we take the breath in. But this style of breathing actually allows you to take a little bit larger breath. So tidal volume increases. And secondly, they also allow you to pace the breath a little faster. So they do creep into the hyperventilation zone of breathing. And a lot of interesting things, by the way, happen when you get into hyperventilation. Because if I just ask you to take 5 hyperventilation breaths, you're going to get lightheaded. You're going to get dizzy. You will feel energized, but you are going to get lightheaded and you're going to get dizzy. Now, there's some interesting science that is emerging around that hyperventilation style of breath work, which is allowing us to understand that this is how you take conscious control over the stressors. So in fact, you're stressing your body. You are activating the adrenaline and your sympathetic nervous system is kicking in, but you are in total conscious control of that sympathetic nervous system activation. So it's a very powerful technique. What you talked about, sort of, giving yourself an anesthesia. A lot of people are experiencing that, and a lot of, hundreds of thousands of people have overcome deep trauma based out of this tumor style, rebirthing or holotropic, what they're called, breathwork styles. So that's one style of breathing, right? Now, there are 2 more. Number 2 is the pranayama style of breathing. Many of these techniques are actually slowing the breath down. So the yogis used to say, the life is not counted in the number of years that you live. It's actually the number of breaths. So that is a very interesting, from a scientific point of view, when you slow your breathing down, some phenomenal changes happen in your body, because it's through that slow breathing that your overall oxygenation at the cellular level improves. And your parasympathetic nervous system is trained by that, and you get a deep sense of calm. And that's why if you look at yoga lineages, although there are faster breathing exercises in pranayama as well, but if you look at the foundation, it's literally breathing in, pausing, breathing out, pausing, right? So the samavritti is literally the definition of the pranayama. And the pranayama is giving emphasis on the pause and not that continuous connected breathing. So that's how pranayama separates from the modern breathwork styles. Now, there's a third aspect to it, and then we'll get to how somebody can get started. So just bear with me. Because this is the one that has been studied the least. And this is the one which is the most mysterious, the most esoteric, and the most spiritual. It just boggles our mind. How is it even possible? Which is no breathing. Or breathing at such a slow rate that's physiologically, it's even hard to detect a pulse on these master yogis. So now we're talking about the samadhi, right? And there's a very interesting story of a very well documented and very interesting story of a yogi by the name Haridas. And this goes back to the 1830s. Which was in the British occupied India, actually the Punjab region of India, which is now in the Sindh Punjab is in Pakistan. And in the presence of British medical officers and the king himself, Ranjit Singh, who was the king of that territory, Haridas did something that only the books have talked about, but no Westerner had ever seen. He buried himself for 40 days. And, we can do a whole podcast on it, but it is such well documented medically, because all the British officers, including the medical officer there, along with the king himself, were very skeptical that this is impossible for somebody to sort of suspend all their bodily function and live for that long. So it's a very mysterious case, but it's very well documented, and medical science cannot explain what's happening. But the yoga practitioners can actually glean into the Upanishads and yoga texts and give some explanation that yogis actually went into samadhi. Right? So that's not practice, because actually it's not even recommended that people they pause their breath for extended period of time unless you are a master yogi. But these are three main layers of breath work that we need to understand: that you can consciously breathe fast, you can consciously breathe slow, and you can consciously suspend your breath or pause your breath for a few seconds to a number of minutes. Now, let me take a pause there before
because I wanted to ask something about this, which I'm just kind of connecting dots here. So I was going to ask you about breath holding, because, that's been a practice of, even a movement practice that we've seen, Rob, on those things. That was really interesting, the way that you said that, of that hypoventilation and the kumbhaka breath that you mentioned, of that space in between the inhale and the exhale where there's no breath, where actually that is the connection of there's nothingness. So that's the potential, the most potential of creativity or connection that could happen. I never really thought about lengthening out that space. And when, we would say, oh, don't hold your breath because you'll pass out, but I'm wondering what you were saying, that if you lengthen that hypoventilation, that it activates the vagus nerve, which is responsible for parasympathetic. Is there some connection of an increasing tone of the vagus nerve to put you in that parasympathetic state?
So again, this would be a hypothesis that I would have to dig into the literature, but let's try to connect the dots here, because a very potent way of working with the vagus nerve is through the breath. We all know that, right? And especially with the diaphragmatic breathing, which maybe we can unpack later today, because also in the yoga community, there's a lot of misconception on what diaphragmatic breathing is. And we mistakenly call it belly breath. And I want the audience, especially yoga teachers out there, to understand this very clearly, that there's a stark difference between the two. So it's actually through the diaphragmatic breathing and this rhythmic breathing is where we actually tone the vagus system. I'm not certain, and I will actually go back and dig into what is the role of pausing the breath. And is there a correlation between, further toning of the vagus system or the vagus nerve through breath holding or pausing that breath? Because I am not able to catch any sort of scientific studies which really focused around the connection between consciously suspending the breath and the vagus nerve. So I would actually have to get back to you on that question. The rhythmic, slow, diaphragmatic breathing is a very effective way to tone the vagus nerve, to really work that vagus nerve.
Could you go briefly into what that is? I'm curious now, the difference, because I thought I knew what that means, but maybe I'm not.
Let's practice, right? So what I want you to do is just put your hand on your belly, as we do often, and I am guilty of that, as I will say in the yoga class. Breathe into your belly. Right? That's a normal instruction, right? So let's take a moment and unpack that. I'm giving you an instruction. Put your hands on your belly, or maybe not, and all you do is breathe into your belly. And if you have placed your hand on your belly, just notice what's happening. So do you notice? So for me, I'm noticing that my chest is hardly moving. My belly is really moving, moving out with my in-breath and in with my out-breath. So that's a normal instruction that we give to somebody. Okay? Are you experiencing the same thing? Right. All right. So now let's put our anatomy hat on and visualize our diaphragm, which is a double dome structure sitting right underneath a rib basket. Okay? So it's something that's separating our thoracic to our abdominal cavity. And imagine that double dome shaped feature, like that of a parachute. And now, when I give you the instruction, I want you to again place your hand on your belly. I'm going to move a little bit back here. And this time, I want you to consciously, first of all, visualize the location of the diaphragm, which is right underneath the rib basket. And I want you to consciously now, as you inhale, consciously pull the diaphragm down. So literally visualize the movement of the diaphragm as you're breathing in. And notice if the breath has gotten much deeper, much smoother. And the second thing you'll notice is you have begun to engage your thoracic, your chest cavity as well. So notice the lower part of the rib cage. Again, go back to the visualization of the diaphragm. Breathe in. I want you to consciously, with control, bring the diaphragm down with a nice, smooth breath in. Now begin to notice all the part of your breathing mechanism, what all is moving. It's not just the belly. Notice what else is moving.
Chest.
Your chest is moving, right? So it's literally opening. I can feel my back opening. So it's very subtle. I want everybody to understand this. That when we say belly breathing, we do mean to say diaphragmatic breathing, right? And the diaphragm movement, anatomically, the way it is connected, and you know anatomy better than me, Kay, so, and yours as well, Rob. So everything is connected, right? I mean, even if you look at our chest, right? Chest cavity. And going back to your initial question of how can somebody learn breathing, right? This is the first thing that we teach with Cultivate Prana in our workshop is posture. Because that's the number one thing that takes away from your lung capacity is this hunching of the shoulder, right? I mean, we are constantly on our cell phones now, so that's happening. We're not sitting upright. Our ear is not over our shoulder anymore. Sort of, it's like a neck. We have that eye hunch neck. So everything in your body is actually well cased and well connected, including our lungs. They're not just suspending there; they're actually well cased around its own sort of fascial system, and it's connected by ligaments and muscles. And when you arch forward, you actually literally are taking from the lung capacity. So the first thing that we really teach is the posturing of our body. Because unless you posture your body correctly, you're never going to experience what that full lung capacity is going to be. So going back to pranayama, the whole objective is how slow can you breathe? And the only way that you'll be able to breathe slow is to use that full lung capacity, right? You have to compensate for the amount of breath that you can take in a minute. Now, you can do 20 breaths in a minute. You're breathing that volume, or you can get the same volume in 10 breaths, or you can get the same volume in 5 breaths. As long as you get the same volume and train your body, you're sufficiently oxygenating your body, right? And by the way, you are at an advantage now because you're exerting less energy. You're less panicky because you're not breathing 20, 25 breaths a minute. You actually have brought the breath down to about 5 breaths a minute. So remember, I just wanted to give a little demonstration because that was a revelation for me as I was exploring my own breath to say the term is used so loosely, breathe into your belly. But let's explain to our fellow community, what does that actually mean? Because you have to engage the diaphragm, you have to let the rib basket open and rise, and you also have to explore the breath in your back. So that's the complete breathing that you can experience with a true diaphragmatic breathing.
That is brilliant. So what I noticed when you said that and I visualized that, I could actually pull more air into my lungs that I don't think I've ever felt that before. It's really interesting because, and we see this in the yoga community, a lot of that rib popping, but that's not just, rib popping. That could be just a weird development of the diaphragm from breathing up here and not allowing the diaphragm to descend. And I'm just like, my ribs are now coming together. That was trippy, man. And then it just started floating up to the back. Oh my gosh, I'm going to practice. That's so crazy. Thank you so much. That was simple and profound.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that was a revelation for me as well, because I just quickly realized how deeper the breath gets and how slow can I breathe. So I can literally take that breath down to, let's say, 2-3 breaths a minute if I properly learn to engage the diaphragmatic.
You know what's fascinating? Okay, when you used to say breathe into your back, right? And I just could not access that. And it was one of the most difficult things. Doing that, pulling the diaphragm down on the in-breath, everything opened up. I mean, it's like you breathe into everywhere. So it was very simple and pop. That was cool. Yeah.
Let me go back to the original question. We're coming back to it, right? So what are the steps to getting started? So step number 1 is posture. Right? And I know you are a big proponent of posture in your practice as well. And I think it's really overlooked right now. We have to look. Our posture changes our chemistry. It is as simple as that. I mean, the more open, upright, and open-hearted you are, the more empowering that posture is. And there's real science backing this up. There's a great speaker by the name Amy Cuddy, Cuddy, and she has a phenomenal TED talk. And this is like maybe more than 10 years ago. So watch millions of times now. And she talks about it, right? I mean, that literally that posture changes your chemistry. So that's the first thing that in my workshops, I try to help the students different ways. So we just did this sitting, but imagine now standing. Imagine now laying down. So posture itself can be unpacked into so many different ways. And the reason to teach that is unless you learn to posture your body correctly, to figure out where your maximum breath capacity is, you won't be able to develop an efficient breathwork practice. What I mean by that is, if laying down allows you to open areas of your breathing muscles that were not accessible or that are not accessible standing or sitting, you need to know that. Because what we would do next is allow you to train in that posture. So no reason for you to be seated and doing breath work. If you can access your breath much more potently, much fully and much freely and easily by laying down. So if you look at a framework to start, that's the number one thing, is the combination of awareness and posturing and allowing you to identify where am I most relaxed and where can I access my breath to its fullest capacity. Okay, so that's posture. Number 2 is awareness. It just blows my mind that how few people are aware of that breath. And I don't use that term as a corny, modern day sort of let's become aware. I literally mean, are you aware of your breathing? Are you aware that right now you're breathing more through one nostril than the other? Check that. You can close one, and you would notice that it's likely that one nostril is slightly more open or significantly more open than the other. Right? And this changes. Again, there's a rhythm to it that changes. So are we aware? Are we aware of the coolness of the breath? As you breathe in, you can feel that air at the tips of your nostril, and you feel that mild coolness of the breath as you breathe in. You can also sense it within the nasal passage. How further deep in the skull can you sense that coolness of the breath? Can you also feel your sinuses as you're breathing in? And then as you breathe out, can you feel the warmness of the breath? The breath just changed the temperature. As it touches the body inside, as you breathe out, you sense that warmness of the breath. So these are such subtle practices, but it's important to give an individual all these tools rather than saying become aware of the breath. It's important to unpack to what does that mean? What is the practice underneath it so that somebody can develop awareness? I mean, you can become aware of sense of smell. That's another practice. So there are so many different practices that we get into to build the level of awareness because it's a simple, yet in my experience, the most profound practice. It's just to simply be able to be aware of the breath. And how often in a day can you become aware of your breath? Not just when you're sitting and doing your breath practice, which is a great start, by the way. But then, as we say, yoga doesn't happen on the mat. It happens out in the world. Are you taking that with you? So similarly, are you taking the practice of awareness and posturing with you? And then the third and final pillar is really giving everybody the scientific and the practical foundation of modulating the breath. By that, I mean, once you understand where you get the most amount of freedom to breathe, once you learn how to become aware of your breath, the third thing we'll give you is how do you modulate that breath? Meaning breathing fast, breathing slow, pausing, right? All those tools, and there's so many different beautiful practices, both ancient and modern, that allows you to really explore how your body begins to feel when you're breathing in a particular style of breath. So those are the three foundational pillars that I and many other breath workers work with, which is posturing, awareness, modulation.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you share any stories of how breath work has helped some of your clients? And what do they, when they come in and sign up for a class, is there a particular sort of kind of person that comes to you? I want to get rid of anxiety, so I want to take your breath class or something like that.
Well, how about I tell you my own story?
Sure, absolutely.
Because that's the best gift that become hard on myself, that it came to me so late, right? I mean, we all had a starting point, right? So, but it came, and I'm really blessed that it came because I grew up as a very anxious child, very afraid, and I can trace back to what that was because that was also my sort of beliefs and conditioning and sort of upbringing in a low middle class family. So resources were hard to come by, and there's the belief around money and resources and trust. And it's now I'm a father, right, of three beautiful children, and I really watch what I tell my children and how I say things to them, because at an early childhood that literally changes your perception of life. It really shapes your mind in an incorrect way. I had wonderful parents, by the way. They gave me everything to their capacity. So I love my parents, but situations around where I was growing were not that great, right? So I realized that I became a chronic mouth breather. And I didn't realize it until a few years back when I was just exploring, becoming aware of my own signs and symptoms as to how my anxiety sort of developed. And I had chronic level of anxiety, although I was great at hiding it. So that's another thing that I did, was I knew that I was very anxious. I knew I was often very stressed, but I had a really good cloak to cover myself and not show it to anybody. I became a master at it. But underneath it, only I was the one who knew that I'm in a really bad shape emotionally. And that you can't do that for long, because by the time I was 32, 33, I just had hit that wall. And unfortunately for many of us, that's what it takes. And it's really unfortunate that you have to really be pushed against a wall. And the only way to go anywhere is, you have to make a real change. So yoga, taking care of my physical body, getting really well trained, and doing my own work, by the way. So I've had wonderful teachers, but I also spent a countless number of hours just studying, reading, practicing to allow my breath to come to a place where I am, majority of the day, I'm very conscious of the way that I'm breathing. And that has truly empowered my life because, one, I've been able to get rid of chronic level of anxiety. I do get anxious, like before I got on this podcast, but I now know how to handle it. I don't have to hide it. I know how to handle my own anxiousness. And I have my own breathing practices that allows me to get out of that mode and sort of change my mindset to here I am, to share a gift, to be energized, to be happy that we are doing this. And that's all it is. It's that these practices have really changed, transformed me at a deeper level. And now I've been able to, very fortunate to be able to share whatever I know with people who come to, our trainings and our practices. And you asked about, giving you one example. So that's mine. I think for me, the people who come to my trainings are from all walks of life. And actually, it's a gift that 90% of the students are women, because I really owe a depth of gratitude to the ladies in my life, right? My wife, my mother. I think the seed of spirituality, and when I reflect back, literally came from her, because it was her sort of chanting and yoga practices and pranayama practices that she used to do in the childhood when I was a child. I never realized what she was doing, how important it is, until life came full circle, where I sort of, came to America and had to learn, Eastern yogic practices from my wonderful Western teachers. So it came full circle. And, now we have people from all walks of life. 90% of the students are women. Just wanted to share my example of how it has changed my life.
Wow, that's really profound. So, Devendra, where can people learn more about Cultivate Prana, your method and your work?
You can go to cultivateprana.com, and the website really captures the three kinds of trainings that I do currently. So I teach a weekly online class, which is Wednesday evenings at 6 p.m. Central, and this is via Zoom. And in fact, this got started during the COVID time. So I had no plan to do this online, but people needed it. I started a small community and it just continued to grow. So we meet in a group setting. So you can practice from your home every Wednesday evening. You can learn about that class if you go to cultivateprana.com. And that's basically the two most style of breath breathing. So it's not hyperventilation per se. We do slow it down, but be prepared to breathe a little deeper and a little faster. So that's the rebirthing, the holotropic two more type of breathing. Then two more ways to come work with us would be, one is I still do workshops. Okay, so as you and I, this is how we got to know each other, is through yoga teacher trainings. I think still yoga teaching is sort of profound and growing, and I think it's really important that the teachers who are getting trained do know how powerful the container of breath is. And it's not just pranayama, by the way. I think that's another thing that the yoga community starts to learn and to embrace, that pranayama is a powerful practice, but it's not just the only practice. So I do offer a 2-hour workshop that introduces yoga teacher trainers into the just this introductory discussion on foundation of how do you talk to your students when they come to the class. And then finally, I lead a 2-day retreat, which I started last year in Southern Indiana. So we do that in Angel Mounds, which is a beautiful location and there's a little cabin there, which is ideal. I feel so connected with that space, where I lead a 2-day really immersive retreat. And that focuses on pranayama. So we go really deep into the science of pranayama. We learn anywhere between 8 to 10 pranayama breathing practices, really properly. The methods, the techniques, the counterindications, everything is packed. It's really intense for those 2 days. And this year, that training is scheduled for September 21st and 22nd. And I only do it once a year. So that's coming up in a couple of months. So that's something that everything is present at cultivateprana.com. So anybody's interested, they can learn from there.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'd be interested in your workshop in September. That's really great. And, when you mentioned in teacher training, learning how to do this, I think would be great. But I also think that, other sports or any other activity, I feel too, my son runs cross country. I'm like, dude, you're not breathing. You could, you know what I mean? And the kids that do breathe, that they're just floating on air. And I'm just wondering, how much of this could really be incorporated into even other kinds of sports or activities. We all need breath, and I think that would just be so great.
Just all medical practitioners to know this basis and to share it. Like, I'm already thinking right now. So, I coach and teach pharmacists into functional medicine. I'd love to talk to you about doing a workshop with them because, this is information that is, what I just learned sitting here.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's interesting that I didn't mention it, but things are opening up because I now train massage therapists. So at a local massage school, I go every year, talk to that community, give them a foundation. I've started, even at my work now, they've started inviting me for workshops for breathing because we just, it's really stressful to sit in front of a computer the whole day, in and out of meetings and not being able to breathe. Some corporate environment are getting really open to these practices. They're hungry for, somebody to come in and teach. And I'm really grateful that even, where I work, I've been able to help a number of my colleagues just, very recently been able to. So I would love to talk to, I'd love to talk to anybody. It doesn't matter what you do in your life. If you learn to breathe properly, it's just going to empower you. Whatever you do, it's just going to make it better. It's going to give you an advantage.
I love that. I love that as you began as this connector to everything, and this integrator of body, mind,
science, and spirituality. The fact that you led with that, I just think that's everything. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, we'll do the spiritual aspect some other time, but there's
we'd
whole
love
other
to talk
thing
to you
aspect.
about that. Yeah, that sounds amazing. We'd love to have you back. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your breath work and your journey?
It's a blessing, right? We breathe. It's a blessing that we breathe. So here's what I will end with. No breath is right or wrong because each breath is a gift from God. So even if you do no breath work all your life, remember that you have this God-given gift of breath, which is really intelligent, right? Our modern way of life has put a lot of stressors, but ancients knew how to breathe without any scientific understanding of anatomy and physiology. They knew this gift of breath. So every breath is a gift from God, and breathe. I'd say breathe. If you can incorporate even one single breathing practices in your daily routine, or if you can just take a deep sigh in and out and be conscious of that, that's in itself is a transformative practice. That's what I'll end with.
Wow, that's so beautiful. I just got chills. That's amazing. Thank you, Devendra. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Soul of Medicine podcast, where science meets soul for whole health healing. Are you ready to reclaim your energy, vitality, and soul purpose? Then feel free to head to our website at kcorpusmd.com and schedule an appointment for your root cause review.